Exactly one heartbeat after Ethan said he needed $100,000, I realized it wasn't about money, it was about power. When Sophie's hand brushed his, her smile unwavering, I understood it was a performance curated. The coffee 2 days later, the dizziness that followed, how she watched me sip as if measuring my obedience. That's when silence cracked, because this wasn't investment, it was invasion. Not just of my savings, but of my trust. And I would no longer be easy prey. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. But when he made that request, my gut told me it wasn't just about the money. I always knew there'd come a day when Ethan would need help, but not like this. Not sitting across from me in my own sunlit kitchen, with his fingers drumming nervously on the table, and Sophie next to him too still, too poised, like she'd rehearsed every breath. "Mom," Ethan said, voice tight but practiced, "we've got this opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stirred the sugar into my tea, watching the swirl disappear into the amber liquid. I could feel their eyes on me, Ethan's flickering with anticipation, Sophie's calm and unreadable. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked, though I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Sophie smiled then, that crisp, magazine-perfect smile she always wore when she wanted something. "It's an investment, Martha. Real estate. A new development outside Denver. Ethan's friend is leading it, and it's moving fast." "Really fast," Ethan added, leaning forward. "They're only taking a few private investors. We could double our money in 2 years, maybe triple." I nodded slowly, but my stomach twisted. I'd heard pitches like this before, back when Harold was still alive, and used to drag me to retirement seminars, where men in shiny suits promised the moon. They always sounded too good to be true because they were. "And how much are you thinking of investing?" I asked. Ethan exchanged a glance with Sophie. It was subtle, too subtle, like they'd choreographed it. $100,000, he said. The words hit me like cold water down the back of my neck. I set my teaspoon down too sharply, the clang against the china louder than I intended. "That's a lot of money, Ethan." "I know," he said quickly, "but this could change everything for us. We want to start a family, move into a bigger place. This is our shot." Sophie reached out and rested her perfectly manicured hand on him. "We wouldn't ask if we didn't believe in it, Martha. We really believe this is our future." The room felt smaller. I looked between them, my son and his wife, and saw two different expressions. Ethan's hopeful, almost pleading. Sophie's serene, but with something sharp in the corners of her eyes. I'd never fully trusted Sophie. She always seemed like she was playing a part, too polished, too perfect. "I appreciate you coming to me," I said carefully, "but I don't feel comfortable with this. It's a lot to ask, and I need to think about my own future too." Ethan's shoulders sagged, but only for a second. "We're not asking for a gift," he pressed. "We'll pay you back with interest. We just need a partner who believes in us." "I do believe in you," I replied softly, "but believing in you doesn't mean handing over my retirement savings." For a moment, silence fell between us, thick and awkward. I heard the distant hum of the fridge, the clink of a wind chime outside. Then Sophie leaned in slightly, the smile still on her lips. "Of course, Martha," she said smoothly. "It's okay, we can talk again soon." But something in her tone, too light, too dismissive, made my skin prickle. And for a brief second, before she stood, her smile faltered, just slightly, just enough. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about an investment. It wasn't even about money. It was about control, influence. Something dark. As they stood to leave, Ethan kissed my cheek, but there was tension in his embrace. Sophie's perfume lingered long after they stepped out the front door. Sweet, cloying, almost chemical. I watched their car pull away from the curb. The wind shifted, rattling the wind chimes again, but this time the sound didn't soothe me. It sounded like a warning, and in my gut, I knew whatever this was, it had only just begun. Sophie's smile fades slightly, but she quickly masks it with politeness. "It's okay, Martha. We can talk again soon." But Martha's gut tells her that something darker is at play. 2 days later, Sophie invited me over for coffee. Her tone was warm, but something in her eyes didn't quite match the sweetness of her words. The phone rang just after I was sitting at the breakfast table, still in my robe, cradling a lukewarm cup of tea, and rereading the newspaper headlines that hadn't changed in years. Sophie's name flashed on the screen, and for a second I almost didn't answer, but curiosity and maybe a small nagging worry nudged me to pick up. "Hi, Martha," she chirped, voice like honey. "I was just thinking about you. Want to come over for coffee? I found this new blend that's supposed to be incredible for relaxation." Relaxation. The word floated in the air like a strange perfume. "I suppose I could drop by," I replied, slow and cautious. "Wonderful," she said. "Come around 11? She hung up before I could ask why the sudden invitation. Something about the call sat strangely on my shoulders, like a shawl that didn't belong to me. Still, at 10:45, I found myself brushing my hair and slipping on my flats, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The drive was quiet, the streets empty in that late morning lull between school drop-offs and lunch rush. Sophie and Ethan's house sat tucked into a newer cul-de-sac, all trimmed hedges and shiny SUVs, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever looked out of place but something always felt off. She opened the door before I could knock. Her smile was immediate, teeth too white, lipstick just a shade too dark for morning. "Martha, you look lovely. Come in, come in." I stepped inside. The scent of cinnamon and something earthy, herbal, maybe, hung in the air. The living room was spotless, not a cushion out of place. I noticed Ethan's absence immediately. "He had to step out," Sophie said quickly, as if reading my mind. "Just us girls to—" She led me to the kitchen, where a French press sat on the counter, steam curling up like a genie in slow motion. 2 mugs, already waited. She poured with the ease of a hostess who's done this 100 times. "It's a new blend," she said, setting the mug in front of me. "Ashwagandha, reishi, something or other. Great for the nervous system. Natural, of course." I eyed the coffee, dark and slightly cloudy. It smelled faintly sweet, but with an odd afternote, bitter, maybe metallic. I took a cautious sip. "Interesting," I said, trying not to grimace. "Definitely unique." "Oh, you'll feel so relaxed in no time," Sophie said, with a smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've just seemed so tense lately." I thought this might help. "Tense?" I asked. "Well, after the other day," she said, voice. "Ethan was really disappointed. But we understand. It's a lot to ask." Her words were kind, but they came too smoothly, like marbles rolling off polished wood, and she kept pushing the coffee toward me. "Drink up while it's hot." I took another sip to be polite, even though the taste coated my tongue with a chalky residue. We made small talk, weather, garden plans, her Pilates instructor, but something in her tone had changed. It was overly cheery, rehearsed. I started to feel it about 20 minutes, a slight warmth in my chest, then the fuzziness behind my eyes. I blinked, tried to focus, and realized the room seemed dimmer somehow, like someone had turned down the contrast. "Feeling okay?" Sophie asked, leaning forward, too casual. "Just a little tired," I said. "Didn't sleep well. Maybe you should lie down," she offered. "You can use the guest room upstairs if you like." That stopped me. I sat up straighter, trying to shake off the growing fog. "No, thank you. I should be heading home soon." She didn't push, but her eyes followed me with something unreadable concern, or calculation. As I stood to leave, I felt my legs wobble slightly. I gripped the back of the kitchen chair. Sophie didn't move to help. "You sure you're all right to drive?" she asked, tilting her head. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile though my vision swam slightly at the edges. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, each step to the car feeling oddly heavy. My breath caught as I reached for the door handle, and I had to brace myself against the side mirror. My heartbeat was slow but strong, thudding like a drum in a cave. I got into the car, shut the door, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, willing the dizziness to pass. Something was wrong. Not fatigue. Not age. The coffee. The damn coffee. Martha walks back to her car after the coffee visit, feeling the effects of the drink. Her head spins, and she struggles to stay focused. Something is wrong. The fog in my head didn't lift for hours. The coffee wasn't just strong. It was something. And then I noticed the footage on my phone. I woke with the sun in my eyes, and a pounding headache that pulsed at the base of my skull like a warning bell. The sheets were twisted around me, and my mouth tasted bitter like old pennies and something. I blinked at the ceiling, trying to orient myself. Had I been dreaming? No. Something was wrong. My thoughts were sluggish, murky, like I was wading through syrup. I sat up slowly, the movement sending a sharp spike through my temple. The dizziness from the day before hadn't passed. It had merely shifted, curling itself into a dull, nauseating haze that clung to my skin. Coffee. Sophie's voice echoed in my head. You'll feel so relaxed. I'd barely made it home yesterday. I remembered fumbling with the keys, collapsing onto the couch, telling myself I just needed to sleep it off. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling, notifications blurred as I swiped them away until I saw it. A video. Timestamp, yesterday afternoon. Length, 1 minute, 42 seconds. I didn't remember taking a video. My thumb hovered for a moment before I tapped play. The screen lit up with Sophie's kitchen, too bright, too clean. I saw myself sitting at the island, the cup of coffee in front of me. Sophie stood nearby, her back to the camera, stirring something with an unsettling deliberateness. She turned, set the mug in front of me with a smile, and gestured. I lifted it, sipped. Then, the image blurred. The frame shook. My own voice muffled, distant, laughed nervously. Sophie leaned closer, lips moving, but the audio dipped, distorted. Her eyes didn't leave me, not once. It wasn't casual. It was observation. And then just before the footage ended, I caught it. A movement in the background. A shadow, distinct but unrecognizable, crossed the far hallway. Not Sophie. Someone taller, broader. I replayed that part again, slower, frame by frame. The figure lingered for just a second, enough to suggest they were watching, listening, waiting. Ethan. My stomach flipped. I tried to remember what happened after I left her house. Driving home, the weight in my limbs. Did I hallucinate? Or was it real? I couldn't say for sure, but I knew this. I hadn't taken that video consciously. My hand must have pressed record by accident or instinct. I stood up, clutching the phone tightly. The room tilted again, forcing me to steady myself against the dresser. My hands were clammy, my heart pounding too fast. Why would Sophie drug me? I didn't want to believe it, but the signs were stacking up. The odd invitation, the way she watched me drink, her insistence that I relax, the fact that Ethan wasn't home, or at least not supposed to be. I replayed the video once more, pausing on Sophie's face as she handed me the cup. She was smiling. Yes, but her eyes weren't warm. They were cold, focused, expectant. This wasn't kindness. It was preparation. But for what? I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down, the glass trembling in my hands. I tried to piece it all together. Had they needed me unconscious, vulnerable? What could have happened if I'd stayed even a minute longer? And who was that in the hallway? It couldn't have been a neighbor. No one else would have been inside, unless Ethan was there all along. I closed my eyes, forcing down the nausea as the memory of Ethan's hand on my shoulder 2 days ago, when he asked for the money, flashed behind my eyes. Was he lying even then? Or worse, was he in on it? Another possibility crept in, unwelcome but persistent. Maybe this wasn't just about $100,000 anymore. Maybe it never was. I reached for my phone again and rewound the video. The shadow, the shape. I enlarged it, the pixels warping into abstraction. Still, I saw it, the subtle dip of the head, the familiar slope of the shoulders. I knew that silhouette. Martha finds another detail in the video. A shadow in the background. Someone else was there watching her. Was Ethan involved? I was ready to confront Sophie, but when I arrived, she wasn't the only one waiting for me. The unexpected presence of Ethan turned everything upside down. I didn't knock. I marched up their porch, and let my knuckles strike the door like a warning bell. The wood vibrated under my fist. My heart was pounding, not with fear but fury. The video was still burned into my brain. That drink, her eyes, the shadow in the hallway, and I was done pretending I didn't know what they were capable of. Sophie answered the door with that same curated smile, like nothing had happened, but her eyes flickered for the briefest second, a blink too long, a muscle tightening at her jaw. "Martha," she said with a note of surprise, stepping aside. "You're early." I pushed past her. The smell of citrus cleaner hit me hard, too strong, like someone had been scrubbing away evidence. I turned into the living room, and froze. Ethan was there. He sat casually on the edge of the couch, arms resting on his knees, as if we were about to talk about the weather. His gaze met mine, unreadable. "Sophie told me you were upset," he said. "We thought it'd be good to clear the air." I stared at him, my throat tight. I'm not here for pleasantries, I said, voice sharper than I intended. I want to know what the hell was in that coffee. Sophie closed the door quietly behind me, then crossed her arms. I told you it was just a relaxation blend. You seemed tense. I thought it would help. Don't play innocent, I snapped. I've got video, Sophie. You handed me that mug and watched me like a lab rat. I nearly blacked out driving home. She blinked slowly, still composed. Maybe you were dehydrated. Don't, I warned. Don't insult my intelligence. There was something in it, something strong. I felt dry. Ethan stood, holding up his hands like he was de-escalating a hostage situation. Mom, let's just take a breath. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned to him, disbelief crashing into my chest. Out of proportion. Ethan, I was sick for hours. I don't remember parts of that afternoon. Do you think that's normal? She was just trying to calm you down, he said, tone maddeningly calm. We didn't want to upset you more after the money thing. Sophie's voice cut in, silken and measured. You were tense, Martha. We thought maybe you'd be more open to hearing us out if you weren't so guarded. My hands clenched at my sides. The room felt too warm. I wanted to scream, to shake Ethan and make him see what was happening. But he just stood there, eyes dull, siding with. You drugged me, I said, voice low. That's not care. That's manipulation. Sophie tilted her head and then for the first time, the mask slipped. Not entirely, just enough. It was a mild sedative, she said, like she was talking about herbal tea. Completely safe. I wouldn't do anything to harm you, Martha. I just needed you calm so we could talk properly. And Ethan, he didn't flinch. He didn't question it. He didn't even look surprised. I stared at them both. My ears buzzed with disbelief. You were in the hallway, I whispered, turning to Ethan. You were there, watching. You knew. He shrugged. I didn't think it'd affect you that much. My knees went weak, but I stayed upright. Somehow, the betrayal was so dense, I could taste it, like copper and ash on my tongue. You were both in on it, I said, the words hollow as they left my mouth. Sophie smiled, calm, calculated, like she'd just won a quiet game. I didn't even know we were playing. You made it clear you wouldn't listen, she said. We just helped you listen. Martha's world tilts as she realizes that her own son is complicit. She's not just fighting Sophie, she's fighting both of them. As the truth began to sink in, I realized the $100,000 wasn't the real issue. It was a much darker game they were playing, and I had unwittingly walked right into it. I sat in my car for what must have been an hour, the engine ticking as it cooled beneath me. The confrontation had ended, but the real storm had only just begun inside my chest, inside my mind. The word sedative echoed in my ears, playing on a sick loop. And Ethan, my Ethan had sat there and defended it like it was reasonable, like I was the irrational one. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house like a ghost, touching old photographs, staring at Harold's urn on the mantel, wondering how we'd gotten here. I thought back over the last year, sifting through every odd interaction, every strange glance Sophie gave me when she thought I wasn't looking. It had all seemed so subtle back then, dismissible. But now, it felt like a breadcrumb trail I had ignored. It wasn't about the investment, that had been bait. The real game was big. I started to remember the little things, how Sophie offered to help organize my financial paperwork after Harold died, how Ethan had pushed for me to digitize everything, and keep it all in one place, how Sophie once joked about putting the house in a trust just in case something happened. At the time I'd brushed it off. I thought it was awkward small talk, but it wasn't. Sophie had been circling me for years, under the guise of daughter-in-law sweetness, of polite concern. She was always smiling, always suggesting, always guiding Ethan just a little too smooth. And Ethan, he hadn't always been like this. There was a time he'd call me just to check in, not to pitch some business scheme. He used to laugh, really laugh. And now, every laugh sounded rehearsed, flat, like he was trying to convince himself. He'd let her in, and now, she was steering the whole ship. I pulled out the old fireproof box I kept under my bed, bank statements, property deeds, Harold's pension documents, and started flipping through. Everything was there. Nothing seemed tampered with. But I knew that wasn't enough. If Sophie was half as smart as I now suspected, she wouldn't leave fingerprints on the obvious things. Still, I needed more proof, not just instinct. I picked up my phone and dialed Samantha Morgan, my old estate attorney. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, but when she answered, Her voice was warm, familiar. Is this about the trust you were considering last fall? She asked after a moment. I paused. No, I said slowly. This is about something more serious. I think someone's trying to take control of my finances, my family. Samantha went silent, then replied carefully. You'd be surprised how often that happens, especially when there's money involved. We set a meeting for the next afternoon. As I hung up, my resolve hardened. I wouldn't be passive anymore. I'd trusted too much, smiled through too many dinners, laughed at too many jokes that now felt sinister. They thought I was weak, old, gullible. They were wrong. I began to jot things down. Times Sophie had come over unannounced. Questions she'd asked about the house, the insurance. Moments Ethan seemed distracted, almost like he was waiting for something. I needed timelines, receipts, dates. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. They hadn't come for just a chunk of cash. They'd come for it all. My house, my accounts, my peace of mind. And slowly, methodically, they'd been building their foundation under my feet. At 2:47 a.m., as I was scrolling through my emails for any signs of suspicious activity, my phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. I clicked it, expecting spam. It read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, ice dripping down my spine. Not Ethan, not Sophie, someone else, someone watching. Martha receives a text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. The threat chills her to the core. I wasn't going to back down. I had already been drugged, manipulated, and lied to. Now it was time for me to turn the tables. The morning after the threatening text, I sat in my kitchen, sunlight pouring in like nothing had happened, feeling anything but safe. The house that once held memories of birthday cakes, Harold's laughter, and late-night mother-son talks now felt infiltrated, compromised. I had been that ended now. I drove to the hardware store with my cardigan zipped up to my chin and sunglasses hiding the shadows under my eyes. By noon, I had 3 motion-activated cameras tucked into my purse, along with an external mic disguised as a potted plant. If Sophie and Ethan were going to steal from me in plain sight, I'd catch them at it. Back home, I placed the first camera in the study, aimed directly at my desk and file cabinet. Another went in the living room, camouflaged among the dusty china figurines no one ever noticed. The last one, my favorite, was tucked into the decorative bowl in the entryway, angled toward the front door and foyer. It would catch their comings, goings, and any whispers they thought my walls couldn't hear. That evening, I called Samantha again. I think they're siphoning money, I said, pacing the length of my bedroom. You need proof before we take this to court, she warned. Find a trail, digital, verbal, anything that ties them to fraud or coercion. So I went digging deep. I searched through every online banking alert, every helpful financial suggestion Ethan had sent in the past year, and there it was. Small, almost invisible, a recurring transfer of $2,000 from an old joint investment account I hadn't touched since Harold passed. Each one marked maintenance fees, each going to an account I didn't recognize. When I clicked on the account details, I saw the name, S&E Consulting, Sophie and Ethan. It wasn't even subtle. A cold wave surged through me, but it didn't paralyze me. It sharpened me. The cameras were live, recording to the cloud. I set up alerts so that if anyone entered the house, I'd get a ping. Then I waited. The next few days blurred into silent chess. I invited them over under the guise of reconciliation, told them I was rethinking the money. I wore a gentle smile and acted confused, scattered. Sophie's eyes sparkled with delight. She leaned in closer than usual, her hand brushing mine as she offered to help get things organized. During their visit, I left the study door cracked. When I excused myself to the bathroom, the camera caught them whispering near my files. Ethan reached toward the drawer. Sophie stopped him, not with words, but with a single sharp look. I downloaded the footage and played it on repeat. It didn't show theft, but it showed intention, control, coordination. The second visit, I prodded Ethan gently. I just don't understand these new accounts, I said, passing him my phone. You always handled the techie stuff. Maybe Sophie can take a look. His face twitched, a flicker of panic gone in a second. No need, he said quickly. I'll review it later. But the seed was planted. He knew I was looking. That night, I went online and began researching Sophie, digging deeper than I ever had. Old social media, archived newsletters from a charity she briefly worked at, even LinkedIn. What I found made my stomach churn. In her mid-20s, she'd been involved unofficially in 2 prior relationships, where older relatives of her partners had mysteriously signed over assets. Nothing criminal was proved, but both men walked away with inheritances, and both relationships ended shortly after. She had a pattern, and now Ethan was her third. I stared at my laptop screen in the dark, heart pounding. It wasn't just about me. It never had been. I was just her current mark. Later that week, I got the alert. The living room camera had picked up movement. I opened the feed. Sophie and Ethan, standing by the fireplace. She's folding, Sophie said. A few more visits, and she'll cave. We need to move faster before she talks to that lawyer again. We'll push for her to sign over the trust this month, Ethan muttered. Then, we list the house. I gasped aloud, hand flying to my mouth. My own son, my home. They were plotting to erase me from my own life. Martha watches hidden footage. Sophie and Ethan are making plans to take over her home. The plot to steal everything she owns is more elaborate than she imagined. I thought I knew the truth, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found. Sophie wasn't just after money. She was after everything I had. The words echoed in my head long after the footage ended. We list the house. Not if. When. I sat frozen in front of my laptop, the cursor blinking in rhythm with the throb in my temple. I rewound the footage again, eyes scanning every inch of the frame. Sophie's posture, Ethan's tone, their coordinated calm. This wasn't improvisation. It was a script, one they'd rehearsed for months. But it was a detail I'd missed the first time that made my breath catch. On the table beside them lay a slim leather-bound folder. Sophie opened it briefly, pointing to a highlighted section. The camera's resolution was just sharp enough for me to zoom in and read the letterhead. A law office. Harrison Cole Family Estate Attorney. They'd already involved legal counsel. I didn't wait. I called Samantha on her personal line, pacing with the laptop tucked under my arm. They're meeting with another attorney. Sophie mentioned forcing me out of the house. Something about legal loophole. Samantha's voice turned cold with focus. Send me everything you have. We'll begin preparing a defense. But Martha, don't confront them yet. We need to know exactly what they're planning. So I dug deeper. That night, I stayed up until scouring old emails, transaction records, and notes from past meetings with Ethan, things I'd once brushed off as harmless. A pattern began to emerge, gradual financial nudges, suggestions that I automate my accounts, occasional logins from unknown devices I'd dismissed as glitches. By sunrise, I found it. A shared financial planning document buried in my cloud drive last opened by Ethan 3 months ago. It wasn't one I remembered creating. In it there were projections, budgeting plans, post-liquidation estimates. My heart pounded as I scanned through the final page titled Phase 3 Full Asset Transfer. That same day, I brought my laptop to Samantha's office. Her assistant led me into a sleek wood-paneled conference room that smelled faintly of leather and eucalyptus. I don't know what I'm looking at, I whispered, sliding the laptop across the table. But it feels like war. Samantha reviewed the files in silence, then leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrow with calculation. This isn't just coercion, she said. It's structured deliberate. They're positioning themselves to claim everything. I exhaled, shaky. Even Ethan. Her expression didn't soften. Especially Ethan. That word, especially, lodged in my throat. It wasn't just Sophie pulling strings anymore. He was holding the scissors too. Samantha tapped a few keys and pulled up something else. A database of business records. She entered Sophie's full name and scanned the results. There, she said, pointing. 2 LLCs. Opened 6 months apart. The second one is active. SE Strategic Consulting. SE Sophie and Ethan. Look at the linked address, she said, dragging the cursor. It was my address. They were using my residence to anchor their fraudulent business. And then, buried deeper, was the twist I hadn't seen come. Attached to one of the LLCs was a bank routing number, linked to regular inbound transfers. Samantha ran it against my statements. The match was immediate. Sophie had set up a shell account, and Ethan had been quietly moving funds into it, likely using the old joint investment portal. Harold and I had opened decades ago. They'd both had access. I'd never revoked it. Because why would I? The $100,000 was never the real goal. That was a distraction, a test balloon to gauge my resistance. The real objective: full financial control, a complete sweep of everything Harold and I had built. That evening I returned home, numb, clutching a flash drive with every document, screenshot, and time-stamped video. My fingers hovered over the screen as I typed in the number. Not Ethan. Not Sophie. 911. I hesitated, heart thundering. Would they believe me? Would they see the trap for what it was? Martha makes the decision to call the police. But will they believe? I wasn't sure if calling the police was the right move, but I had no other choice. What they were doing was illegal, and it was time to make them pay for what they'd put me through. The line rang twice before a calm male voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? I never thought I'd be the one making this call, not for theft, not for my own family. My fingers tightened around the receiver, and for a second I considered hanging up. But then I looked at the flash drive on the table, the documents Samantha had helped compile, the surveillance clips frozen on my laptop screen showing my son and his wife plotting like strangers in my home. I need to report financial fraud, I said, my voice cracking. It's my son and his wife. Within 30 minutes, a uniformed officer named Patel arrived at my door. His notepad was crisp, his demeanor steady, but when I handed over the files, his eyebrows lifted with quiet disbelief. You've got dates, documentation, video surveillance, financial statement, he muttered, flipping through each page. This is more than enough to open an investigation. I nodded, numb. I don't want to press charges unless I have to, but I need protection. They're taking Patel promised to forward the report to their white-collar crimes division, but it won't be quick, he warned. Cases like this unfold in layers. Layers. The word rang in my ears for days. Over the next week I received a formal case number, and was contacted by Detective Lee Armstrong, a woman with tired eyes and a voice like gravel. She visited my home twice, combing through the evidence again and again. Every time she paused a recording, I'd feel the knot in my stomach tight. Your son seems fully engaged, she observed one morning. He's not being coerced. I don't know who he is anymore, I said, barely able to look at her. The investigation gained momentum slowly. Armstrong subpoenaed bank records, followed the paper trails I'd fled, but the process dragged. Bureaucracy wrapped itself around every corner. Meanwhile, I woke up each morning half expecting Ethan or Sophie to show up at my doorstep, demanding to see me, trying to twist the narrative. Instead, I received something else, an envelope, hand-delivered, with thick textured paper embossed with a law firm's name, White and Cordell. Inside was a cease and desist order, accusations of slander, a veiled threat to sue for defamation, unless I immediately withdraw all unfounded accusations, and refrain from further attempts to damage the reputations and livelihoods of Ethan and Sophie Blake. No signature, just typed venom. I called Samantha. They're bluffing, she said, trying to intimidate you. Don't respond, let them make the next move. But I was already past the point of fear. That letter only sharpened my focus. A week later I got the call. Detective Armstrong's voice was lower than usual. We found something you need to hear. She didn't elaborate. She asked me to come down to the precinct. The room was small, cold. A gray table separated us as she opened a laptop and played an audio file pulled from a surveillance warrant, one I hadn't even known had been approved. Ethan's voice filled the space, calm, controlled. She's suspicious, he was saying, but we've already moved enough. The new accounts are secure. If anything goes south, Sophie takes the fall. I blinked. Then it continued. I need this done, Sophie. I'm tired of waiting around for her to hand over what's already mine. Sophie said nothing in return. The silence on her end was deafening. Armstrong paused the audio. We've traced 5 separate fake accounts, 3 in Sophie's name, 2 in Ethan's. But he's the primary controller. Every account ultimately routes back to him. She may have been complicit, but she's not the mastermind. The words punched the air from my lungs. Ethan, my boy, he wasn't the pawn, he was the king. Every smile, every plea for help, every mom, trust me, all of it was I felt the air shift in the room, the betrayal so dense it pressed against my ribs. What happens next? I whispered. Armstrong leaned back in her chair. We take them both down, but him first. Martha is stunned. Her own son was a major player in the conspiracy. What will happen now? The arrest sent shockwaves through my family, but the real question was, how much longer would Sophie and Ethan try to deny their crimes? The knock on my door was hard, official, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for a polite answer. I opened it to find Detective Armstrong standing there, flanked by another officer. No words, just a quiet nod and a sealed envelope in her hand. They made the arrests this morning, she said. Not just Ethan and Sophie. We picked up 2 of their financial contacts, fake consultant. Both confessed they were helping launder the transfers. I clutched the doorframe to keep from swaying. I had pictured this moment in my head for days, but now that it was real, it felt hollow, like I'd climbed a mountain, only to find more terrain stretching endlessly ahead. They're in holding, Armstrong continued. Ethan's already spoken to his attorney. Sophie is doing what she does best, manipulating, I said bitterly. Armstrong's glance confirmed it. The next day I met with Ethan at the precinct. They led him into the interview room in handcuffs, but his expression wasn't hardened. It was exhausted. A shadow of the boy I once knew clung to him, but his eyes flicked up when he saw me, and for a heartbeat, silence passed between us that felt heavier than anything either of us could say. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he mumbled, barely able to meet my gaze. You stole from me, I replied quietly. You used your wife to get close. You used me, he winced. Sophie said it would only be temporary, that we'd give it back once the accounts grew. Sophie said, I echoed. Do you even hear yourself? His jaw tightened. She believes in us. She was trying to secure our future. No, I said, stepping forward. She was trying to steal our future, and you let her. Ethan's shoulders slumped. He looked small in that metal chair, nothing like the confident man who once stood proudly beside me at Harold's funeral, promising to take care of me. She's all I had left, he whispered. And what am I? I snapped. Just a checkbook with a heartbeat. He didn't answer, but his hands trembled where they rested on the table. Outside the room, Armstrong waited. He's still under her influence. But cracks are forming. He knows she's pulling away. That same night, Sophie made her first move. From her jail cell, she called Ethan directly, a monitored line. What she didn't know was that the call was being recorded and reviewed. She was cool as ever, her voice sugar-coated poison. They're trying to divide us, Ethan, she purred. Don't let them. Remember our plan. You said you'd protect me. Protect you? He repeated. His tone was uncertain. They'll spin it, she continued. Make it seem like it was all me, but we both know this was yours too. Your vision. Your brilliance. Don't let them make you weak now. It was a trap. She was roping him into ownership, anchoring him to her crime. But Ethan said nothing. Not that night. The next morning, Armstrong sent me the transcript. I read every word twice, my hands shake. She's trying to keep him close, I said. Even now. Desperation. Armstrong replied. We think she knows she's cornered, but desperation can be dangerous. And Sophie wasn't the type to go quietly. The day after the call, Ethan requested to see me again. This time, there was no glass between us, just a table, a fan humming somewhere above us, and the weight of too many shattered illusions. I think I messed everything up, he said, voice hoarse. You did, I replied, but that's not the end, unless you let it be. He looked up. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not yet redemption, but a fracture, an opening. I don't know who I am without her, he admitted. You'll find out, I said, or you'll let her finish what she started. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. That evening, Armstrong called. Sophie's pushing back. She's demanding a private deal. She wants to talk to Ethan one last time alone. She'll try to flip him again, I said. She's already started. Sophie makes a last-ditch attempt to manipulate Ethan, offering him a way out. Will he take it or face the consequences of his actions? It was over, but I was just beginning to rebuild. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, I was free to live my life on my own terms. The house was too quiet. After weeks of tension, shouting, visits from police and lawyers, and the sound of my own heart hammering in my ears, the silence felt foreign, unnatural, but not unwelcome. I stood in the center of the living room, the same place where I'd watched Ethan and Sophie plot on hidden cameras, and let my fingers brush over the edge of the fireplace mantle. Dust clung to the ridges.
I hadn't cleaned it in weeks. I'd barely breathed in this space. I'd been too busy surviving. Now it was time to reclaim it. Sophie had been denied bail. Her charges had stacked too high, too fast. Fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Her so-called consulting empire had crumbled overnight. Every account frozen, every fake LLC exposed. Her name, once associated with strategy and savvy, now belonged on police blotters and court dockets. Ethan, he was another story. After Sophie's last failed attempt to sway him, something in him cracked for good. He agreed to testify, to hand over everything. The fake account, the forged signatures, even voice memos. Sophie had once sent him instructing exactly how to manipulate me. In exchange, he was granted a plea deal. When he told me, he stood like a boy who had just been grounded, not a grown man who had betrayed his mother. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, "but I don't want to lose you too." I didn't answer right away. I simply nodded, and told him I needed time, and time, it turned out, was exactly what I had.
With the investigation behind me, and the court orders rolling in, I finally had the freedom to breathe. I changed the locks, closed old accounts, met with Samantha twice a week to rebuild what was mine. Every file we updated felt like another brick in a new foundation. Stronger, guarded. I had Harold's will amended to ensure protections I never thought I'd need. I canceled the digital access Ethan once had to anything with my name on it. And for the first time in years, I said no when someone offered help because I didn't need rescuing anymore. I drove myself to the hardware store and bought paint for the living room. Something new, sage green, calm, grounding. I scrubbed every inch of the kitchen, removed the floral curtains Sophie once insisted I hang, and replaced them with plain linen ones that let the morning light flood in. In small, stubborn ways, I reclaimed everything. But healing isn't linear. I still heard his voice sometimes, Ethan asking for $100,000 like it was pocket change. I'd replay the video in my mind, the way Sophie's eyes had lingered just a moment too long after I sipped that coffee. Some nights, I dreamt of locked doors and cold hands, and couldn't breathe until the morning light touched my walls. Still, day by day, I stitched my life back together. I even started gardening again. The rose bushes out front had wilted from neglect. I trimmed them gently, watered them with care, and watched as tiny buds began to form. Life, I realized, has a way of coming back when you give it space. Then, one morning, I opened the mailbox and saw his handwriting. Ethan. The envelope was thick, slightly crumpled, my name scrawled in blue ink across the front. My fingers hesitated over the seal. The sun cast long shadows across the porch, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked. But in this moment, all I heard was my own breath. Inside was a letter. No return address, no formal greeting, just his words. "Mom, I've made mistakes I can never undo, but I've also made decisions I hope you'll one day understand. I want to explain, not to excuse, but to rebuild. If you'll let me." There was more, several pages more, but I didn't read on. Not yet. I folded the letter, slid it back into its envelope, and pressed it to my chest. Because now came the hardest part. A letter from Ethan arrives. What does it say, and what will their future look like after everything that's happened? The truth had always been buried beneath layers of lies. But now, the unraveling had begun. I couldn't undo the damage, but I had a chance to take control. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, Ethan's letter in my lap, unopened. It had been 3 days since I found it in the mailbox, and I still hadn't read beyond the first paragraph. The ink on the envelope was starting to smudge at the corners where I'd held it too tightly. I'd told myself I was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was simpler. I was because once I knew everything, there would be no going back. I finally opened it late on a Sunday evening, the house silent except for the occasional creak of the settling floorboards. Outside, dusk had painted the yard in purples and gold. I read every word, slowly, breathing each in like a bitter medicine. "I didn't see what she was doing," he wrote. "Not really. At first I thought we were a team, that she believed in me, in us. But now, I see it, the way she made me feel like nothing, unless I was doing her bidding. I don't know who I am without her." That line broke something in me, because even now he wasn't entirely free of her. The following week, I received a call from Detective Armstrong. The case was still unfolding, more financial strands, more associates surfacing, but she warned me the pace would slow. Sophie had clammed up completely, now trying to paint herself as a pawn in Ethan's scheme. She's shifting blame, Armstrong said, claiming she was coerced, manipulated. I almost laughed. Sophie had never been anyone's victim, not truly, and yet, the public narrative was starting to blur. It was all too familiar how powerful people, when cornered, reshaped themselves into something sympathetic. Sophie played her role well. Pale makeup, soft-voiced interviews, a suggestion that she was pressured by a husband with financial aggression issues. I watched the televised bail hearing, her eyes red-rimmed and chin trembling, and I nearly hurled my coffee cup at the screen. Ethan, meanwhile, asked to meet. I said no twice before I finally agreed. Not in public, not at home, at the church fellowship hall where we once hosted his high school graduation party. He showed up in jeans and a hoodie, sleeves tugged down over his wrists, like a child trying to disappear. I know I can't fix this, he said, sitting across from me at the folding table, but I need to say it to your face. I was wrong. I said nothing. She manipulated me, he continued. But I let her because it was easier than facing the truth, that I felt entitled to what you had. I thought it was owed to me. I looked at him then, really looked. This wasn't the boy I raised, and yet pieces of him flickered in the corners of his eyes. The guilt was real, but so was the damage. She made me feel like you were the enemy, he whispered. I closed my eyes, and you believed her. I wanted to believe someone did, he said. After Dad died, I didn't know where I belonged. The silence between us cracked like thin ice. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folded paper, one I had drafted with Samantha's help, a legal document, restricting Ethan from making any future claims against my estate. This is for you, I said. You sign it, and we start fresh. You don't, and we don't speak again. He looked at it, stunned. You're still giving me a choice. No, I said softly. I'm giving me one. He stared at the document for a long time, then nodded. I'll sign it, he said, but not because I deserve a second chance, because I need to become someone who does. For the first time, I believed him. As we stood, I touched his arm, just briefly, a mother's instinct, still alive, still flickering, but I couldn't make the next step for him. Later that night, as I stood over the sink rinsing a plate, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voicemail. I played it on speaker. It was Sophie. Martha, she said sweetly. Ethan still belongs to me. You know that, right? Don't get too comfortable. Martha finally tells Ethan, this is your last chance to make things right, but it's not just for me, it's for you. Will Ethan choose the right path, or will he remain under Sophie's influence? The game had come to its ultimate conclusion, but nothing prepared me for the last betrayal. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about survival. The ink was dry on the restraining order. The house had been retitled solely in my name. My lawyer, Samantha, had filed the paperwork for full financial guardianship, effectively sealing off any remaining access Ethan or Sophie could have had. Still, my hands shook. I stood in Samantha's office, sunlight filtering through the tall windows, casting long slats of gold across the polished floor. The scent of citrus wood polish clung to the air, but it didn't soothe me. I felt exposed, like this final act of protection was also a kind of grief. I've never done anything like this before, I said quietly, eyes fixed on the folder. Samantha slid toward me. No one thinks they'll have to, she replied. But it's the right move, Martha. Clean break. Full control. No more leverage. I nodded, trying to ignore the sting in my eyes. Outside, the city hummed with indifference. Inside, I was dismantling what was left of a life I had built for my son, a life he tried to steal. The night before, Ethan had shown up unannounced. He stood on my porch in the rain, soaked through and shivering, holding the signed contract I'd given him, his rights to the estate relinquished. I don't want your money, he'd said. I want peace. He looked like a boy again, but peace doesn't grow in a garden of betrayal. I hope you find it, I'd whispered, before gently closing the door. Now I sat across from Samantha again, ready to end it for good. The final signatures are here, she said, tapping the last page. This severs all financial and legal ties to both of them. No more joint ventures. No more possible claims. I picked up the pen. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Samantha raised a brow as I glanced at the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Martha, a voice said, clear, controlled, and unmistakably Sophie. Don't hang up. My stomach turned. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she continued, voice dripping with mock humility. I've had time to reflect. I see now that I pushed too hard, manipulated. I hurt Ethan. I hurt you. I want to make amends. You're calling me from jail, I said flatly. You think this performance still works? There's no performance, she replied. All sugar. Just a woman trying to start over. We could help each other. The way she said help made my skin crawl. I hung up without another word. Samantha exhaled. She's dangerous, I corrected. We turned back to the document. I reached for the pen. The moment my hand touched it, there was a knock at the office door. Samantha's assistant poked her head in. Sorry, there's someone here asking for Mrs. Blake. Says it's urgent. Won't leave without a word. I frowned. Who? The woman stepped inside. She was mid-40s, professional and sharp-eyed. She held a folder tightly in her hands. I'm sorry to intrude, she said. My name is Danielle Quinn. I used to work with Sophie Blake. Years ago. Samantha and I exchanged glances. Danielle stepped closer, laying the folder gently on the desk between us. I saw the case on the news, she continued. And I realized something. Sophie did this before, to someone else. She flipped open the folder. Inside were photos, documents. One a scanned letter nearly identical to the one Ethan had written me. Another, a bank routing sheet, showing transfers from an elderly woman in Arizona, dated 8 years ago. She ran the same scheme. Danielle said. Different name, different target. The woman died before anyone could press charges. My mouth went dry. She's been doing this longer than any of us thought. Samantha pulled the documents closer, flipping through rapidly. This changes everything. Just as Martha is about to sign the final documents, a new unexpected figure appears, someone from Sophie's past, with information that could change everything. I thought I knew everything about Sophie and Ethan, but when the figure from Sophie's past arrived, everything I thought I understood came crashing down. Danielle's visit should have been the end of it, but the next day she returned, with someone else. His name was David, early 50s, graying at the temples, suit just a little too wrinkled to be strategic. He looked tired, like a man who'd been keeping a secret for far too long. When he stepped into Samantha's office behind Danielle, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Familiarity. Not with me, but with Sophie. She used to be my fiancée, David said after a long pause. Before she was Sophie Blake, she was Sophie Kendall. The room seemed to inhale. She was charming, he continued. Charismatic. She made me feel invincible. We ran a marketing consultancy together on paper. It was hers. In practice, I funded everything. He opened a folder, another one, thicker than Danielle's. Inside old bank records, vacation photos, property deeds, in both their names. 6 months before we were supposed to marry, my account started bleeding. Slowly, stealthily, she convinced me to transfer assets to her name, for tax purposes. I didn't notice until it was too late. What happened to her? I asked. David's jaw clenched. She vanished, took everything, rebranded herself, and from what I gather now, moved on to Ethan. My throat tightened. And you never pressed charges? I tried, he said bitterly, but she used legal gray areas. Nothing I had stuck. Danielle stepped in then, placing another sheet on the table. It was a flyer, an early promotional mock-up for SE Strategic Consulting, Sophie's initials, Ethan's too, but this one had a third initial crudely blacked out. D. David, Samantha muttered, piecing it together. David nodded. She had the template, the pitch, the seduction, all ready before she even met Ethan. It hit me then, hard and cold. She hadn't just stumbled into Ethan's life, she'd chosen him, trained him, groomed him, into becoming the perfect accomplice. She had studied me, my finances, my grief. She'd taken Harold's death as an opening, and crawled through it like a snake under a door. And Ethan, my son, hadn't even known.
He arrived at the office later that afternoon. Samantha had called him, said he needed to hear what David had to say. The moment Ethan saw him, his face changed. Recognition dawned, slow, uncertain, but real. "I remember you," Ethan said. "She said you were a bitter ex who stalked her." David gave a sad smile. "No, I was the trial run." Samantha laid out the documents, the photos, the financial trails. Ethan stood there, reading through the evidence in silence. His skin paled, his hands trembled. For the first time, he looked less like a man trying to justify himself, and more like a man whose world had cracked open beneath him. "She used me," he whispered. "She made you feel like it was all your idea," I said gently. He nodded. "She told me you'd never respect me unless I took charge, that you thought I was weak, that I had to prove I could lead, and you believed her." "I needed to," he admitted, "because the alternative meant I was nothing." David sat down across from him. "She knew how to find your cracks and press into them. That's what she does. And when she's finished, she blames you for bleeding." We sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing into the corners of the room. Eventually, Ethan looked at me. Really looked at me. "Do you think I'm evil?" "No," I said, "but I think you let someone else wear your conscience like a coat, and now you've got to live with what that feels like." That evening, I sat at home with the new evidence spread across my kitchen table. The sun dipped low through the blind. I thought about confronting Sophie, face to face, showing her I knew everything, that she hadn't won. But Samantha's voice echoed in my head. "Let the police do their job. Don't give her another opportunity to twist the narrative." Still, something deep inside me, older than logic, more primal, whispered for confrontation, for closure. I picked up the phone, not to call Sophie, but to make a decision. Martha must decide whether to confront Sophie with this new information, or wait for the police to act. But one thing is certain, everything has changed. It was over, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wasn't easy, but I had finally reclaimed control of my life. The sound of the final gavel in court wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, soft, almost anticlimactic. But for me, it echoed like a cathedral bell. After months of betrayal, manipulation, surveillance, and soul-rending choices, Sophie Blake was officially sentenced. 16 years. Fraud, conspiracy, elder exploitation, identity theft. Her empire, if you could call it that, was declared a shell of deceit. Her accounts were seized, her loyalists exposed. Every mask she'd worn was stripped off piece by piece, under oath and cross-examination, until nothing remained but a woman who could no longer spin the truth fast enough to stay ahead of it. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing in person. I didn't need to. Samantha kept me informed, sending transcripts and legal updates as if checking in on the weather. But I'd already found my closure in the moment Ethan made his choice. He didn't answer Sophie's final call. Instead, he turned it over to the police, along with every remaining document, audio message, and bank login he still had access to. It was Ethan who walked into the police station the next morning, head bowed, and said, "I want to help make this right." That, I think, was the moment I exhaled for the first time in months. The weeks after the sentencing were quiet. I started to reclaim my mornings, reading in the sunroom again, feeding the birds on the back porch, taking long walks through the neighborhood without watching over my shoulder. My home felt like mine again. The air didn't hum with paranoia. The walls didn't whisper betrayal. I even changed the locks a second time, not because I had to, because I could. Still, the emotional scars didn't fade so easily. I kept waiting for the guilt to roll in, for some wave of maternal longing to pull me under, but it didn't come in the way I expected. I didn't miss Ethan as much as I missed the idea of who I thought he was. That boy with scraped knees and too many questions. The one who used to cry when I left for work, then sneak into bed with me during storms. That boy was gone, but in his place was a man trying genuinely to come back. He called once, left a voicemail. "I'm not asking to be your son again. I just want you to know, I'm trying to be someone you wouldn't be ashamed of." I didn't return the call. Not then. The house grew warmer as winter approached. The fireplace crackled in the evenings. I filled the pantry again, made stew, invited friends over for the first time in a year, and I started writing in a journal Samantha gave me during the darkest weeks. Just a few pages a night, mostly questions, sometimes answers. Then last week, Another envelope arrived. Ethan's handwriting, still crooked, still familiar. Inside a letter, short, honest. I see it now, all of it. I let someone steal my voice, then used it to hurt the only person who ever truly loved me. I don't know if forgiveness is possible, but if there's a path back to even knowing you again, I'll walk it, barefoot if I have to. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. There was no manipulation, just his truth. I folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen table, made myself tea, sat by the window. I didn't know if I could forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever, but for the first time I wasn't angry, I wasn't afraid, I was free. I'd protected what mattered. I'd reclaimed my name, my home, my dignity. The rest, whatever came next, could wait. And as I stared at that letter, a single sentence wrote itself in my mind, unspoken but clear. Sometimes survival isn't about who you lose, it's about who you finally choose to become. As Martha closes the door to a new chapter in her life, a letter from Ethan arrives, an apology, and an offer to rebuild their relationship. But after everything that's happened, is reconciliation possible?